The summer of 1991 was supposed to be full of laughter and campfire songs, but instead it turned into a mother's lifelong nightmare. An 11-year-old girl vanished from her summer camp cabin one rainy night. No witnesses, no sounds, no trace, and then nothing. For 9 long years. Until one stormy evening, deep in the Vermont woods, her mother stumbled upon something that shouldn't have been there, a flashlight. Old, scratched, half buried in the soil, but still glowing faintly. It was the flashlight her daughter, June, had once carried everywhere. And that tiny beam of light would lead to the discovery of a chilling secret, a hidden network of stolen identities, erased memories, and missing children. But before we unravel that haunting mystery, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the stories that linger long after the lights go out. Now, picture this. The July moon hung low over the pine forest of Pinefield, Vermont, its pale glow like a thin scar in the sky. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of wet moss and fallen leaves. Clare Danvers stood completely still, her breath shallow, one hand gripping something she'd just unearthed from beneath the roots, a yellow flashlight, the same one she'd given her daughter, June, for her 11th birthday. Its rough, scratched surface still bore the faint words she'd written years ago, "J. Heartsuit Mom." Her pulse pounded. This couldn't be a coincidence. She turned the switch, it clicked dryly, and then, unbelievably, a faint light flickered to life. It trembled weakly in the dark, but it was enough to send a chill up her spine. That light illuminated the moss-covered trees and damp ground where she'd found it. Then she heard something, a soft, nearly inaudible sound like a breath, or the quiet press of a foot against wet earth. Claire froze, her back stiff, flashlight trembling in her hand. She aimed it toward the noise, but the path ahead was just a tunnel of darkness, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound and memory alike. That night came rushing back to her, the night June disappeared. The helicopters, the dogs, the shouting officers, it all blurred together in a haze of flashing lights and sleepless terror. June Danvers, age 11, vanished from Cabin 6 at Whispering Pines Summer Camp sometime after midnight on July 19, 1991. No one heard a scream. No one saw her leave. Her bed was neatly made, pillow untouched. The window was open just an inch, and the cabin's clock, oddly enough, had stopped at exactly 2:11 a.m. At the time, Claire was in Boston on a short work trip for the hospital. When the camp finally called, June had already been missing for more than 8 hours. The drive to Elmrook felt endless. Every mile, Claire's mind spun through theories. Maybe June had wandered off into the woods. Maybe she'd been taken. Maybe she was just hiding as part of a prank gone too far. But when she arrived and saw the empty cabin, she knew. Something terrible had happened. For days, rescue teams combed the forest. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Volunteers scoured every inch of land. No footprints. No torn clothing. No cries for help. Just silence. And that silence became her companion for years. The last photo Claire had of her daughter showed June looking up, sunlight streaming through her hair, her lips curved in a half smile as if she knew something she never got the chance to say. That image ended up on hundreds of flyers taped to every wall, every store window, every post office in Vermont. It even made the local TV stations. But as months turned into years, the calls stopped coming. Leads dried up. Hope too. Claire's husband, June's father, didn't last. He stayed for 2 years, then packed a bag and left without a word. Maybe grief broke him. Maybe silence did. Claire remained in Elmrook, surrounded by the ghosts of newspaper clippings, police reports, and maps of the campgrounds. Whispering Pines became more myth than memory, until tonight. Because now, that very flashlight, June's flashlight, had somehow reappeared, buried deep in a forest 2 miles from the old campgrounds, an area that had been sealed off years ago after a landslide. Claire tightened her grip and took a cautious step toward the narrow path where she'd heard the sound. The trees seemed to close in, their shadows bending with the beam of her trembling light. And though she didn't know it yet, that single step would change everything. The flashlight's beam quivered across the dark, rain-damp trees, cutting thin lines of light through the mist. "June?" Claire called softly, her voice barely louder than the whisper of the night breeze. No answer, just the forest breathing around her. Yet something stirred inside her as she stood there in the glow of that battered, decade-old flashlight. It wasn't quite hope. It wasn't fear either. It felt more like a door creaking open, a door she thought had been sealed shut long ago. She took a careful step deeper into the woods, unaware that what waited beyond those trees wasn't just the truth about her daughter's disappearance. It was the kind of truth that cracks your faith and never quite lets it mend. 9 years had passed since that awful night. And though the town of Elmrook had moved on, it carried faint scars of the past, like a snake shedding its old skin but keeping the same eyes. Storefronts had new names. The library had a shiny new sign. Even a few trees had been cleared for more parking spaces. But in a small wooden house at the end of Larch Street, nothing changed. Not really. Inside, Clare Danvers lived among memories, a cabinet full of case files, a child's watercolor painting of a summer sunset, a map of Pinefield Forest with red pins marking every search site. People offered advice the way people do when they don't understand. You should see a therapist. You should move somewhere new. Her life had a hole shaped exactly like her daughter, and there was no filling it. She still worked part-time at the town library, tending the children's section. She smiled at kids who asked where dragons lived or why the moon followed their car home. But every story she read ended too soon. Every fairy tale without a proper ending reminded her of June. And every July, without fail, Claire returned to the forest. She'd take a few days off work, pack her hiking gear, rent an off-road vehicle, and drive out to the overgrown trails where Whispering Pines Camp once stood. The camp had been abandoned years earlier after a storm collapsed one of the wooden bridges and injured several staff members. No one rebuilt it. The land was sold to the state and sealed off as a wildlife preserve. But to Claire, it was still alive. The forest whispered. It remembered. It owed her something. Then, one quiet morning, July 17th, an email arrived. From Jacob Pell, subject. Regarding your search at Whispering Pines, Miss Danvers, I understand you've searched the area for clues. Last week, during a patrol in the western section of Pinefield Forest, I came across several old metal objects unearthed after the rain. Among them was a yellow flashlight that matches the one described in your daughter's missing person file. If you have time, I can take you to the site. Claire read the message 3 times, her eyes locking on 2 words, yellow flashlight. It felt like someone had reached through time and shaken her by the shoulders. That simple phrase carried every sound and memory she'd tried to bury, the quick click of the switch, the way June laughed on her first camping night. "Mom," she had said, shining the light on the tent walls, "this makes me feel like a time traveler." Claire printed the email and folded it carefully, tucking it into her shirt pocket close to her heart. That afternoon, she packed her gear with the precision of ritual, hiking clothes, a headlamp, sturdy boots, a forest map. And then she slipped in the most important thing, June's photo. It was taken the morning she disappeared. June wore an olive green jacket with Danvers stitched on the chest, her hair in neat braids, holding that yellow flashlight to the sky like a tiny sword against fear itself. The police had never found anything conclusive. Theories piled up and fell apart. Maybe she argued with a friend and wandered off. Maybe someone lured her out. Maybe it was a kidnapping. There were no footprints, no screams, no signs of struggle. The rain had washed away whatever evidence might have been there. Even the camp's security camera had been out of order that night. A few kids claimed they saw something, lights, shadows, whispers in the woods, but their accounts were dismissed as overactive imaginations. Claire never bought the runaway theory. June wasn't impulsive or rebellious. She was thoughtful, careful, sometimes too careful. The kind of kid who'd ask her mom's opinion on which cereal to eat. And above all, she was afraid of the dark. June would never have stepped into the forest at 2 in the morning unless someone made her. It was proof that something was terribly wrong with the story everyone believed. Claire met Ranger Jacob Pell at the trailhead just before dusk. He was lanky, maybe in his late 20s, with a patchy beard and eyes that flicked nervously toward the trees. He shook her hand politely and adjusted the strap of his backpack. "Shouldn't take more than half an hour," he said. "The terrain's a little messy after the rain, though." Together, they started the hike, half an hour through twisting, root-tangled ground slick with mud and moss. The forest canopy loomed above, thick enough to block out most of the sun, turning daylight into a kind of dim green twilight. Somewhere ahead, she knew, waited the truth, buried in the soil, glowing faintly against time and disbelief. Jacob stopped beside 2 towering oak trees, their roots knotted around a narrow, rocky crevice. The forest around them was still heavy with the smell of rain and earth. "It was here," he said quietly. "Took a bit of work to dig it out." Claire dropped to her knees, her hands already sweeping aside the damp soil. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't stop, not until her touch found something cold and familiar. The rough plastic surface, the faded yellow color. Her heart skipped. She lifted it slowly, a flashlight caked in mud, the spring-loaded cap tilted just slightly open. And there, beneath the grime, the faint carving appeared, J.D., Love, Mom. Her breath caught. There was no question, it was June's. This wasn't just another false lead. This was real. The first tangible clue in nearly a decade. Maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the truth. Claire pressed the switch. Click. The old light flickered weakly to life, trembling as if gasping for breath. Its beam stretched out into the thick, dark woods, the same woods that had swallowed her daughter 9 years earlier. The wind began to rise, bending the treetops as clouds gathered above. Rain was coming again. But this time, Claire wasn't leaving the forest empty-handed. The flashlight rested in her palms like something sacred. Not a tool, not a relic, but a message. A call. She sat there for a long while on the damp forest floor, watching the flicker of the beam. It was fading, weak, like a memory refusing to die. And in that light, she saw the scratches, tiny marks on the plastic shell, the same ones she remembered June making years ago while tossing pebbles near a stream. Proof that this flashlight, this object, had lived through her daughter's hands. Carefully, Claire took a sealed anti-static bag from her backpack, one she'd once used during her lab days, and slid the flashlight inside. She zipped it shut with practiced precision. By the time she reached her car, the rain had begun to pour in sheets, cold drops cutting through her jacket, but Claire didn't feel it. Not the chill, not the wet. All she could feel was the growing certainty curling inside her. That flashlight hadn't been buried there for 9 years. Someone had put it there, and someone wanted her to find it. The next morning, Claire walked into the Elm Brook police station. She'd been there countless times before, pleading, questioning, begging, but this visit was different. She wasn't here as a desperate mother. She was here with evidence. The officer at the front desk was young, maybe new. He looked confused when she placed the sealed plastic bag on the counter. "This," Claire said firmly, "is my daughter's flashlight. Missing since 1991. I found it in Pinefield Forest yesterday." Her tone was calm, but carried a quiet steel. that made the young officer straighten. He made a quick call, and within minutes a woman entered the lobby, short, strong-shouldered, her silver hair clipped neatly above her ears. "I'm Sergeant Myra Clean," she said, extending a hand. "You must be Clare Danvers." Claire nodded. "I know your name," Myra continued softly. "I read your daughter's case file once. One of the most haunting cases in this county." Her eyes fell to the flashlight. "This is really hers?" "I carved the inscription myself," Claire said. "You can check." They sat down together, and Claire recounted everything, her email from the ranger, the exact spot, the condition of the find. Myra took notes carefully, then said, "We'll send it to the state forensics team. They can test for DNA, fingerprints, see if anything unusual shows up inside." Claire nodded, but her mind was already racing. What if the DNA isn't June's? What if it's someone else's? What if there was another child involved? She left the station near noon, the rain now just a mist. But instead of going home, she turned down a quiet residential street toward a white house with a sagging porch and an old mailbox rusted at the corners. This was where Lieutenant Ryan Colby lived, the man who had once led June's investigation. She hesitated at the door, then knocked. When he opened it, his expression froze. "Clare Danvers. My God, how long has it been?" "9 years," she said. "And I need to talk?" Colby nodded, wordless, and stepped aside to let her in. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Case files still sat in a box by the corner, collecting dust like they'd been waiting for her return. He brewed a pot of coffee, 2 mugs just like old times, and they sat across from each other at his worn kitchen table. Without a word, Claire placed the plastic evidence bag on the table. "I found June's flashlight," she said quietly. Colby's eyes widened. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I remember it. Yellow, rough texture. She carried it everywhere." "It was found near a rocky crevice in the northwest part of Pinefield," Claire said. "Not near the cabins, almost 2 miles away." Colby frowned. "We searched for weeks back then, but mostly around the camp. The northwest zone was considered too steep and dangerous for a child to reach. If someone else was there, though," he leaned forward, the weight of the years showing in his eyes, "then this means they came back. Someone returned to that forest." Claire met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I want to reopen the investigation," she said, "and I need your help." Colby didn't speak for a long time. His shoulders sagged, his eyes dim but restless. He wasn't a lieutenant anymore. No badge, no authority, but something in him flickered awake. Not duty, not pride, guilt. "I let that case fade into nothing," he said finally, voice gravelly. "They pressured me, the mayor, the camp board, even the insurance company. They all wanted it closed. Too many headlines, too much heat. I gave in." Claire didn't flinch. She'd suspected as much. "We don't need them," she said quietly. "We just need the truth." Colby exhaled, long and weary. "All right. I still have copies of the statements, camp maps, photos, and the few things that never made it into the public reports." Her eyes lifted. "Unreleased?" "Because if I'd released them back then, I would have been reassigned, or worse." He disappeared up the narrow attic stairs and returned a few minutes later carrying an old tin box. When he opened it, the smell of dust and paper filled the kitchen. Inside was a brown folder, edges curled, labeled by hand. Claire's pulse quickened. She lifted the cover and began flipping through the old black and white photographs, the familiar outline of Cabin 6. Bunk beds, the cracked wall, and then something she hadn't seen before. In one photo, carved faintly into the wood beside a bunk bed, were the words. Claire stared at it, her breath shallow. "I was told to ignore it. Said it was kids' nonsense. But I always wondered." She looked back at the picture, her hands trembling slightly. "He comes when we sleep. Everything she thought she knew began to shift beneath her, like the forest ground after a rainstorm. The flashlight wasn't just a clue. It was an invitation, a summons to dig deeper into something far darker than she'd ever imagined. Whispering Pines Camp was no longer a camp. It was a ruin, a graveyard of laughter and ghost stories swallowed by vines and time. Claire parked by the old service road and hiked the last stretch alone, Colby's map folded tightly in her jacket pocket. The wooden gate leaned on its hinges, half broken, the camp sign on the ground, the word whispering nearly erased by moss. Cabin 6 sat at the far southwest corner, near the edge of the dense pine line where daylight dimmed into permanent twilight. According to the map, it had once been labeled Group C Girls. Now it was barely standing. The tin roof had collapsed in places, the walls warped and green with rot, but the bones of the cabin were still there, silent and waiting. Claire pushed the door open. The hinges shrieked, a sound that cut through the quiet like a scream remembered. Inside, time had stopped. 4 rusted bunk beds, a floor blanketed in dead leaves and brittle insects. The air was thick. Mold would rot, something faintly sweet and sour like old memories left to spoil. She stepped inside slowly, her flashlight casting a thin beam through the dust. Every creak beneath her boots echoed like a ghost breath. For a moment, she could almost hear the sounds of that summer. Children whispering, giggling, her daughter's voice saying, "Mom, tomorrow I'm going to be the lead scout, okay?" Claire swallowed hard and moved toward the far wall. That was where the carving had been. She knelt, brushing the dirt and debris away. Then she wiped the surface gently with a handkerchief and raised her light. There it was. Still faint but real. The words were uneven, desperate, scratched by something dull. Maybe hairpin, a rock, or even a fingernail. Claire's fingers traced the grooves, and an icy shiver ran through her, not because of the cold air, but because she'd seen that phrase before in June's diary. "Last night I saw a shadow at the window, but I didn't dare call anyone. I know he only comes when everyone's asleep." Her chest tightened. She turned the light toward the corner bunk, June's bed. The blanket was long gone, but the bed frame remained. A torn curtain still dangled from a nail nearby. And then something caught her eye. A small fold of paper wedged deep into a crack in the wooden floor. She crouched, used a pair of tweezers from her pocket, and pulled it free. The paper was fragile, covered in dust, but when she blew gently, faint words appeared in smeared blue ink. Claire froze. The blue shirt. Back then, the camp manager, Russell Granger, was known for always wearing one. He was the only staff member with a master key to every cabin. He'd been questioned, of course, but his alibi had held. He'd been asleep in the camp office, his story confirmed by the night security guard. Still, something about him had always felt off. Too calm. Too rehearsed. And now, this note. If June had written it, it might have been her last message, a warning left behind in the dark. Claire slipped the fragile paper into a small nylon evidence bag, sealing it carefully and marking its location in her notebook. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. Then, crack. The sound of a branch snapping outside. Claire's body went rigid. She switched off the flashlight instantly. The cabin sank into pitch-black silence. For a long moment, she heard only the forest, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant drip of water. But then came another sound. Soft, rhythmic. Footsteps. Not the quick scatter of a deer or the scratch of a squirrel. These were heavier, deliberate, human. And whoever it was, they didn't want to be seen. Claire waited in the darkness of the cabin, heart steady but alert. After a few minutes, she eased outside, her flashlight beam low and narrow. The forest floor was soft from rain, the grass pressed down in a fresh pattern of footprints, large, heavy, made by boots. Not hers. She crouched, studying them, the mud still damp at the edges. Someone had been there not long ago, male by the size. "Hiking souls?" Claire snapped a few quick photos, then began the careful walk back to her car, every step deliberate, every sound amplified by the silence of the woods. Once she was on the road, she called Colby. "The writing's still there in cabin 6, she said, voice tight. "And I found something else, a note. It mentions a blue shirt and keys." For a moment, the line went quiet. Then Colby spoke, voice low. "Granger's dead. Stroke last year. But his wife, Louise, she's still around. Lives out by Rutland." Claire didn't hesitate. "I want to meet her." "I'll make a call," Colby said. Then, after a pause, "Claire, be careful. If someone's keeping an eye on you, this isn't over." She hung up and caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Behind her, the Pinefield forest loomed like a dark ocean, silent, unending. Whispering Pines wasn't just an abandoned camp anymore. It was a wound. And now it was bleeding secrets. 2 days later, on a fog-drenched Wednesday morning, Claire drove toward Rutland. The Vermont hills rolled by like soft, gray ghosts under the mist. The world felt muted, as if even nature didn't want to remember. Louise Granger's home sat on the edge of town, a modest red brick house with tidy boxwoods and a rusted iron swing that swayed faintly in the wind. Claire parked and stood at the curb for a moment, gathering her thoughts. In her hand were three things: the photo of the yellow flashlight, the image of the cabin wall with those chilling words, and the note warning about the blue shirt. Whatever Louise knew, Claire could feel it already. It had been buried for years under fear and guilt. Louise opened the door herself. Her gray hair was neatly pinned, a wool shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes flickered in quiet surprise at the sight of Claire. "I'm sorry to bother you," Claire began gently. "I'm Clare Danvers." Louise's expression shifted, a flash of recognition, then something like sorrow. "You're June's mother," she whispered. Then, without another word, she stepped aside to let her in. The living room smelled faintly of liniment and old pine wood. The curtains were drawn, and the silence felt heavy. No TV, no radio, just the tick of an unseen clock. "I remember your picture in the papers," Louise said finally, sitting down on a small sofa. "I'm so sorry about what happened to June." Claire took a slow breath, then placed the flashlight photo on the coffee table between them. "I found this last week in Pinefield Forest," she said softly. "It belonged to my daughter." Louise stared at it, her lips tightening just slightly. Claire leaned in a little. "In cabin 6, I also found a note. Someone wrote, 'Don't trust the blue shirt. He has the keys.' Do you know who that might have been referring to?" For a long while, Louise didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Russ always wore a blue shirt in the summer," she said. "He thought it made him easy for the campers to spot." Louise's hands tightened around her shawl. "Some nights he came home late. He smelled like cigarettes and liquor. I'd ask what kept him, and he'd just say, 'Had to teach a stubborn kid a lesson.' When I asked which kid, he'd change the subject." A chill crept up Claire's spine. "Did you ever see him angry with a camper?" Louise swallowed hard. "Once, a boy tracked mud across the dining hall. Russ grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the wall. Later, he apologized to the parents, said he'd been tired. But that wasn't the only time I saw something strange." She paused, eyes clouded. "One night, I saw him carrying a bag out into the forest, like past midnight. I asked what he was doing. He said it was trash that needed dumping far away. But the next day, I found children's shoes in the laundry room, the same kind the campers wore." Claire's throat tightened. "Louise," she said softly, "did you ever suspect he might have done something to my daughter?" Louise looked down at her lap. The silence stretched so long that Claire thought she wouldn't answer. Then, finally, she whispered, "I did, but I was scared. Scared of him. Scared of what I might find out. Claire nodded slowly. She didn't judge her. Fear doesn't always look like panic. It often looks like silence, like 9 years of pretending not to remember. I can't prove what happened, Claire said, voice trembling just slightly. But I have to know, was there anyone else close to him at the camp? Someone who might have helped him or kept quiet? Louise hesitated again. Then she said, there was one woman, Melaine Porter. She was in charge of Cabin 6 that summer. After June disappeared, she quit and moved to Maine. I heard she'd found something, but she never talked about it. Claire wrote the name down carefully. Thank you, she said, rising to leave. Louise stayed seated, staring at her hands. Then, just as Claire reached the door, the older woman's voice came, trembling but clear. Claire, there's something else you should know. Louise's last words echoed in Claire's mind as she drove north. Ask about the third rainy night. She didn't know what it meant, but the way Louise had said it, half warning, half confession, sent a shiver through her. 3 days later, she was in Barlow Point, a small coastal town in Maine where the fog never quite lifted and the air smelled of salt and secrets. Narrow streets twisted around old brick buildings, and down by the docks, boats rocked gently like they'd been waiting there forever. A lighthouse stood in the distance, tall and still, a watcher of things long past. That's where she found Melaine Porter, the woman who had been the counselor for Cabin 6 the summer June disappeared. Now she was an elementary school teacher, quiet and withdrawn, the kind of person who lived behind closed curtains and didn't exist online. Claire tracked her to a small second-floor apartment above a corner bookstore. When the door opened, a woman in her late 30s stood there, ash-blonde hair pulled back, eyes wary and hollow. Claire recognized those eyes instantly. She'd seen them in the newspaper photo from 1991, the same eyes filled with shock and guilt. I'm Clare Danvers, she said quickly, her breath catching a little. June's mother. I just want to talk for a few minutes. Melaine didn't move at first. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and salt, and a gust from the open window swept a strand of hair across her face. Finally, she stepped aside. Come in, she murmured. The apartment was simple but tired, books stacked on every surface, water stains along the wooden floor, and a cat curled in an armchair, tail twitching. A wall clock ticked softly, running a few minutes slow. They sat facing each other in faded armchairs. Claire placed a photo on the table between them, the yellow flashlight, dirt-streaked but still unmistakable. I found this, Claire said, in Pinefield Forest, about 2 miles from where June disappeared. Melaine's eyes fixed on the photo. Her hand trembled just slightly, resting in her lap. You know something, Claire said quietly. Melaine shook her head, but her gaze never left the flashlight. I'm not here to accuse you, Claire said. I just need the truth. You were the last one to see her. You were there that night. The silence stretched thin as wire. Then Melaine spoke, her voice low and tired. I still dream about her, her face in the dark, eyes open, like she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Claire's throat tightened. Tell me about that night, she said gently. Melaine nodded slowly, as though trying to push through a fog of memories. It was the third rainy night that week, she began. I woke around 2 in the morning. I heard footsteps outside. Not in the cabin, just beyond the window. Soft. Careful, like someone didn't want it to be heard. Claire leaned forward, pulse quickening. I looked through a gap in the curtain, Melaine continued. There was someone standing there. A man, I think, wearing a gray raincoat, hood up. No flashlight, no umbrella, just standing. Did you see his face? No, Melaine whispered. He was tall, thin, moved like he had an old injury, one leg stiff, maybe a limp. She paused, swallowing hard. I turned to wake June, but her bed was empty. Claire froze. I panicked, Mylene said. I screamed for her. The others kept sleeping like they couldn't hear me. I ran outside barefoot, but all I saw were footprints in the mud leading into the woods. I ran to the camp office. Russ Granger was there. He was asleep, or pretending to be. I told him what happened. He just looked at me and said, "You're mistaken. No one's missing. Go back to bed." Claire clenched her fists. "Why didn't you tell the police?" "I did," Mylene said bitterly. "But by the time they came, Russ had changed everything. He claimed I'd taken sleeping pills that night." I imagined it. He even forged a medical note, forced a nurse to sign it." Claire felt her stomach turn. "He threatened you, didn't he?" Mylene's eyes shimmered. "The next day I found a note under my door, a photo of my mother walking home from work. The message said, 'If you keep talking, the next one to disappear won't be a camper.'" Her voice cracked. "I was young, Claire. I was terrified. So I stayed quiet. Then I quit." The room was heavy with silence. Even the clock seemed to pause. Claire spoke softly. "Do you remember anything else? Anything about the man in the gray coat?" Mylene frowned, thinking. "Just one thing. He wore gloves, but only on one hand. The right hand was bare." Claire wrote it down in her notebook. An odd detail, but maybe the kind that would matter later. Then she asked, "Did you ever hear Granger mention the third rainy night?" Mylene's expression changed instantly, fear, recognition. She looked away. "Yes," she whispered. "Once." I woke up and overheard him on the phone. He was whispering like he didn't want anyone to hear. He said, "The third rainy night. Perfect timing." The words hung in the air like a chill draft off the sea. Claire's pulse quickened. The third rainy night. The phrase that had drifted across years and miles was no coincidence. It was a thread. And now, for the first time, she could see where it might lead. Claire shivered. She stood, slipped her card into Mylene's trembling hand, and told her to call if anything else came back. But just as Claire reached the door, Mylene's voice broke through the silence, thin, trembling, yet heavy with something unspeakable. "I think June knew something was wrong," she whispered. "That night, she hugged me and said, 'If I disappear, tell my mom I love her so much.'" Claire froze. The air seemed to leave the room. Outside, the ocean whispered against the docks, calm and uncaring, but inside her chest, something else began to stir, a tide of fury, grief, and relentless determination. Whoever had taken her daughter, they had no idea what storm they'd awakened. When Claire finally returned to Elmrook, the summer air was thick and stifling, the kind that made every breath feel heavy. In her bag was an old, tattered notebook and a growing sense of unease. She'd found the notebook buried in June's toy chest, one she'd searched hundreds of times over the years. But this time, something was different. The lining at the bottom felt too thick, too stiff. Acting on instinct, Claire tore it open, and there it was, a diary. The first line written in purple ink, "No one reads, not even Mom, unless I disappear." Claire's hands trembled. She turned the pages carefully, each one a fragile piece of her daughter's forgotten voice. First day at Whispering Pines. Cabin 6. Top bunk, left side. "Miss Mylene is nice. I'm happy. Made a friend, Eloise. She talks in her sleep. Woke up at 3 a.m., saw a shadow at the window. Thought it was a dream. Someone opened the cabin door last night. No one woke up. Quiet steps. Not like adult shoes, but not like kids either. Saw a flashlight beam. Not mine. Didn't tell anyone. Scared they'd laugh. Hid my flashlight in my sleeping bag. Someone went through my backpack. Nothing missing, but my jacket smells like cigarettes. Maybe the guard, but he doesn't smoke." The next page was scribbled faster, jagged lines, the handwriting uneven, as if June had been writing through fear. I heard a call. Thought it was Eloise, but it wasn't her voice. It sounded hurt, then breathing, close to the door. I didn't move. I just wrote this. If anyone reads, he only comes when everyone's asleep. He knows who's afraid of the dark. Claire's breath caught. She shut the diary so hard her knuckles turned white. Every warning her daughter had tried to leave, every strange look, every whisper had been dismissed as childish imagination. Now, those imaginings read like a scream no one had listened to. The next morning, Claire took the diary straight to Sergeant Myra Clean at the local police station. Myra, a solid woman with kind but tired eyes, read through the pages slowly, her expression tightening as she went. "You're sure this is June's handwriting?" she asked. "Positive," Claire said firmly. "I've read her Christmas cards. Every curve matches." Myra exhaled and set the diary down. "We'll have it tested. Handwriting analysis, paper fibers, DNA." But she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Without physical evidence, these entries are more circumstantial than conclusive. Claire met her gaze. "I don't need you to overturn the system," she said softly. "I just need someone to stop pretending nothing happened." Myra nodded, her eyes heavy with understanding, the kind that comes from years of watching good people fight impossible battles. Then she opened a folder. "We just got preliminary results from the flashlight you found," she said. "There's DNA from an unidentified female child, but there's also another trace likely from an adult." Claire leaned forward. "Not June's?" "No, not a match." The second sample's female, older, and faint, probably from sweat. Could have been someone scared or running. Myra reached for a small plastic evidence bag and placed it on the desk. Inside was a tiny rolled-up piece of paper, no bigger than a coin. "We found this tucked inside the battery compartment," she said. "It reads 9 Red Oak." Claire repeated it under her breath. 9 Red Oak. A place? A code? A message? As her mind raced, fragments started to align. The man with one glove, the cigarette smell, the third rainy night. Each piece like a shadow in her memory, forming something dark, something deliberate. June had left clues. And someone else, someone who'd held that flashlight before, had left a code. Claire's voice came out raw, hoarse. "We're getting close, aren't we?" Myra didn't answer right away. She just looked at the diary, then at Claire like she knew this was no longer just a case. It was a reckoning. Claire leaned forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Is there any place around here called Red Oak?" Myra grabbed her phone and began to type. Within seconds, her brow furrowed. "There's an abandoned orphanage," she said slowly, called Red Oak View. Closed in 1994 for administrative violations. Claire's pulse quickened. "And the number 9? Myra scrolled through an old layout she'd found online. "Room 9, she said, "is at the far end of Building A, right next to the forest edge." That was all Claire needed to hear. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her daughter had been there. Maybe not alive, but someone who knew her had been. Someone who'd held that flashlight. Someone who tried to leave behind one last message. Red Oak View wasn't just a building, it was a ghost frozen in time. When Claire saw it, her stomach twisted. The orphanage rose from the trees like a forgotten monument, 3 stories of gray brick, its windows cracked and empty, its stairs strangled by vines. Moss clung to the walls like rot, and the air around it felt wrong. 15 miles. That's all that separated it from Whispering Pines Camp. 15 miles between laughter and loss. Why hadn't anyone ever connected the two? Was it carelessness? Or was someone making sure no one ever did? Claire wasn't alone this time. Sergeant Myra had insisted she take someone with her, a young investigator named Caleb Thorne. He was quiet most of the drive, glancing at Claire now and then, his expression torn between caution and curiosity. He didn't think she was crazy, that much was clear, but he wasn't ready to believe what she believed either. Claire didn't mind. She didn't need belief. She needed answers. They parked by a dirt trail that led straight into the woods. The gate was long gone, replaced by rusted warning signs tilting in the wind. None of it mattered. The forest opened up to a courtyard littered with broken toys and scraps of old signage. The air smelled of mold, burnt plastic, and something bitter, something like time itself decaying. Flashlights on, they stepped inside. The main hallway was a maze of shattered glass, overturned chairs, and collapsed ceiling tiles. Each step echoed like a memory refusing to die. On the second floor, at the end of the long corridor, stood room 9. The door was barely hanging on, its hinges corroded into a twisted frame. Claire stepped in first. The room was small, 8 square meters at most. A rusted bed frame leaned against the wall, and a cabinet lay half open, its drawers scattered like old bones. But what stopped Claire cold were the words scrawled above the bed, written in faint, childlike handwriting Jenny doesn't remember. Her eyes had locked on something just below the writing, a name underlined in pencil, faint but unmistakable. Her heart stuttered. Caleb blinked. It can't be. Claire turned, her voice low and burning. It is. Either June was here or someone who knew her real name. Under the rusted bed, Caleb's flashlight caught something small, a wooden box, lid cracked and lined with decayed cloth. Inside were 2 things, a pink plastic butterfly hairpin identical to the one Claire had bought for June in 1990, and a crumpled folded note. Caleb unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. We're not allowed to look out the door. They say if you look, you'll be taken away forever. But she looked, and after that, she wasn't herself anymore. Claire sank to the floor. The hairpin trembled in her hand. Her daughter had been here, maybe under another name, maybe stripped of everything that made her June. But she'd left something, proof that she'd remembered, if only for a moment. Maybe they changed her name, Caleb said softly. Made her believe she was someone else. Over time, the real memories could fade. Claire shook her head, tears breaking loose despite her effort to stay composed. No, she remembered enough to write her name. They moved on to the 3rd floor where the old staff offices were. Most rooms were ransacked, but one, heavier door, locked from the outside, remained sealed. Caleb broke it open with a shoulder shove. Inside, the air was stale, paper dry. Filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers mostly empty, but one old metal cabinet had survived. Claire pulled it open, and there it was, a folder labeled Unidentified Children, August 1991. Inside was a list of 11 names, most marked temporary. Each had been assigned by a nurse. Caleb read aloud, line 6, Jenny D., received July 23rd, 1991. Claire's throat closed. June disappeared on the 19th. Teresa thought for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the dresser beside her bed. There's a box, she said finally, her voice trembling just a bit. Top drawer? I kept it all these years. Couldn't throw it away. Claire opened the drawer gently. Inside was a small wooden jewelry box, its corners worn smooth from time. Inside lay a few folded letters, a faded photograph, and a silver locket with a tiny crack across its front. Claire lifted it with careful fingers. The moment she clicked it open, her breath caught. Inside was a photo of a little girl, smiling wide, gap-toothed, and bright-eyed. The same eyes Claire had seen every night in her dreams. Teresa smiled faintly. That was taken the summer she turned 11. She never liked cameras, but that day she said she wanted to remember what happiness looked like. Claire could barely form words. Did she ever mention where she might go? Teresa shook her head. No, she was secretive about that. Said she wanted to help people like me, her words. Then she packed a small bag, hugged me, and left. I thought she was starting her own life. Claire's throat tightened. And that was 3 years ago? Yes. After that, nothing? Claire thumbed through the letters, most of them written in neat, slanted handwriting, filled with kindness and gratitude, but the last one was different. It was shorter, rushed. Dear Mom, if I ever stop writing, it's not because I forgot. It's because someone remembered. Don't look for me. If she finds you, tell her I forgive her. The date, July 14th, 2022. Claire read it twice, her pulse hammering. Who do you think she is? Teresa frowned. I always thought it was me, some teenage guilt thing. But now, I'm not sure. Claire gently folded the letter and slipped it into her bag. Every word felt like a breadcrumb leading deeper into a forest she couldn't yet see the end of. Before she left, she turned to Teresa. If Elena or June ever reaches out again, please call me. No matter what time. Teresa nodded, her eyes glistening. You know, Mrs. Danvers, she said softly, that girl had a light in her, but also a shadow that never left. Maybe finding her will finally let both rest. Driving back toward the main road, Claire gripped the steering wheel tighter. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in a red-orange haze that bled across the trees. The wind hummed against the car, carrying whispers of names. June, Jenny, Elena, all blending into one haunting melody. The director, Teresa said. Dr. Marinhale. She was the one behind the entire resilience program. She claimed it was meant to rehabilitate abandoned children. But by '99, funding was pulled. Hale disappeared before the investigation began. No trace. Caleb opened his notebook. We've been tracking a few names linked to Red Oak's financials. Marin Hale received transfers from a private biomedical firm called Ether Dynamics. They specialized in neurological trials, mostly off the books. Claire whispered, You think my daughter was part of an experiment? I don't think, Caleb said grimly. I know. Teresa looked away, guilt shadowing her expression. There's one more thing, she said. Before June was sent away, her last night here, she slipped me a drawing. I've kept it all these years. She walked to an old drawer and pulled out a folded piece of yellowed paper. When Claire unfolded it, her heart stopped. It was a child's sketch of two figures standing under a circle of light, one tall, one small. Above them, in uneven purple letters, were written the words, When you turn on the light, I'll come home. Claire's tears fell silently on the page. Outside, the storm broke open, thunder rolling like memory itself, crashing through years of silence. And deep inside Claire, something shifted from grief to resolve. She looked up at Caleb, her voice steady. Find Marin Hale. Claire stood beneath the same crooked pine tree where June had vanished 9 years ago. The air was thick with dew and the earth smelled of old rain and secrets. She lifted the flashlight, the same one June had loved playing with, and flicked it on. A thin beam cut through the darkness, trembling slightly in her hand. June, she whispered, voice cracking. If you're out there, if you can see this, come home. Silence. Only the faint hum of crickets, the rustle of leaves, the low sigh of wind moving through the branches. Claire waited, her breath shallow. Minutes passed. Then, just as she lowered the flashlight, a flicker answered in the distance. One quick pulse, then another, like a heartbeat made of light. Her breath caught. She steadied the beam and flashed twice, her and June's old signal from when June was little and afraid of the dark. 2 flashes meant I'm here. After a moment, the answering light flickered again. Once, twice, then vanished. Claire stumbled forward, heart racing, calling, June! But her voice was swallowed by the forest. When she reached the spot where she thought she'd seen the light,